we are called to do as followers of Christ is to appreciate the differences in the other person.
Every marriage is going to have arguments.
One of the key things you want to remember whenever you're having any kind of discussion is that you're a team.
How we argue does matter. Every argument should be bringing glory to God and bringing you closer together.
Right.
And giving you an understanding about the other person. When you're in a marriage, a healthy marriage, you get to a point where you don't want to be doing something that is hurting your spouse. You don't want to be doing something that bothers your spouse. It seems so simple, but worth the fight. It's worth it. Hello everyone, and welcome back to Down Home with the Coonrod Clan. Once again, I am getting an opportunity to sit down with my husband and do a chat together. If we have not met yet, if this is your first time here, my name is Stephanie. This is my husband, Brett. We have 5 daughters. We recently moved from Maryland to North Carolina. And we've been married for almost 14 years. It'll be 14 years in June. That's like the rundown of like all the main highlights. Today we are going to talk about how to argue.
That's right. Arguing is one of those things that all couples do. And it probably happens a whole lot more than you really would like it to.
Yeah.
But we had some points that we'd like to talk about that we would like to share with some of the things that we did wrong when we argued. We also would like to talk about different personality types. How should we argue? And what's the biblical foundation for arguing? Like, how does God tell us we should handle our arguments?
Yeah, so we're going to tackle all of those topics, but we're going to start off with the personality. Now, there's a lot of different personality types. The main two are you have a stuffer or an exploder. I'm an exploder and he's a stuffer. Now, something that both Brett and I did wrong, and I'll explain, well, both of us will explain the stuffer and exploder in a second. But something that we did wrong was we didn't realize that the other person's way of handling arguments was just as destructive as our own. Neither was healthy or wholesome.
Right, because if you're a stuffer like me, what you're doing is you're still having those feelings and you're just pushing them down and saying, you know what, it's not worth this to do it, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to ignore those feelings, throw them into that nice bottomless cavern in my soul, and
release
just deal with it in some other day, or deal with it in some other way that I feel like. And the problem is, what happens is it tends to pile up, and then what happens is you'll hit a point where you just kind of snap, and then you're just going to word vomit everything that's wrong, and your partner's going to be looking at you like, that was like 7 weeks ago. What are you we dealt with that 7 months ago. And so there's that whole issue of it'll come out eventually, you know. So what you have to do is kind of in the moment and in an appropriate way, you're going to want to talk about your feelings. Like, hey, that hurt my feelings, whatever.
Well, and we'll get into how to deal with that. But and for me, I was the exploder.
Mm-hmm.
So I felt like things were handled right away because it was here, we got it all out, and that was it. So we're good. We're good to go.
But she didn't know. I'm holding on to that till later, and I can fire it off.
Where I was like, like we said, like it just, you have to first recognize and realize what your style is, and have the humility to not change who you are necessarily, but change how you deal with that. So I still am an exploder and he's still a stuffer. However, we both encourage each other and hold each other accountable to how we deal with that. So I can't just go off the handle and be like, you know, you didn't put the toilet seat down. That is so obnoxious. Like, please, like, oh, you know, I can't do that. I have to take a breath, calm down, be like, hey, you left the toilet seat down again. Can you please put it down? This is the worst example because he's never left the toilet seat up ever.
And I'm going through my brain right now going, have I left the toilet seat up in like the past 12 years?
That was the worst example. 14.
Well, I know, but it wasn't a time in the beginning where I forgot to put it down. So I was doing it the better.
No, I can't remember a time that you ever forgot. He's been very good about the toilet seat. That's why, that was a horrible example. But either way, I would have to still address it, but I didn't have to come at everything with intensity. I needed to learn to respect that he might need a little time to absorb a situation.
For me, though, on my end, as a stuffer, I need to be sure to come with my feelings and acknowledge them. When she does something that bothers me, like one of the things she does all the time is she leaves the cap off the milk, right? That's a legitimate thing that happens. And for me, it doesn't normally frustrate me, but if I pick the milk bottle up and start shaking it, and milk shoots all over the house. Well, now I'm frustrated because I'm you didn't put the cap on the milk. No, but I need to express myself to her when I'm upset or when something bothers me, even if it's a little thing, because those little things will pile up and then they'll become big things, and that's all you see. You just start seeing the other person as being trying to annoy you or trying to frustrate you.
And I want to touch on the milk cap and another thing about a stuffer. Typically, a stuffer is more passive aggressive or passive passive, and then the exploder is aggressive or aggressive aggressive. So Brett is passive aggressive, and so he will kind of make underhanded comments about, so real life example would be the milk. He'll shake the milk up and be like, "Ugh, so annoying." I will say, "Hey, are you frustrated about the milk? Is there something you want to talk to me about?" Kind of instead of bottling this frustration, he needs to learn to be like, "Hey, I went to the milk again and the cap was off. Could you please put the milk on? Could you please put the cap on the milk?"
Right.
Or the honey, or the syrup, or the whatever. Both aggressive or passive, you have to learn whatever way you're handling it to do it appropriately.
You have to meet in the middle. And it's not, you don't want an extreme on either end. You want to try and meet in the middle. So the exploder has to kind of, and typically I think the exploder comes across as, especially if you're a passive person, the exploder's going to come across like they're the one that's always wrong because they're the one that's expressing themselves all the time, and that's not true. You're just as wrong, you're just not expressing it. So we want to make sure that we're talking about our feelings and getting those out.
That's a great point. I'm glad you brought that up because that was something early in our marriage that as an aggressive personality and you being the passive, that was something that I was made to feel like I was wrong. I was bad. But in my mind, I was like, okay, yes, I need to work on this. But you have to work on this too. You have to make sure that you first recognize the fault in yourself before you're pointing out the fault in someone else. That's biblical. Okay. Before you look at the speck in someone else's eye, get the plank out of your own eye. And so in a marriage, that's huge. It's wherever you fall in, passive, aggressive, more the retreater, the fight or the flight. You have to learn what to do with that. So it's okay to be a passive person. It's okay to be an aggressive person. You just have to make sure that you're glorifying God with that. No matter what your personality is, you have to glorify God.
And that's really important that as Christians, the people around us, our children, they're going to see us argue. They're going to see how we argue. People are going to see that little spat that you had in the grocery store. Because one of you wanted Cheetos and the other one's like, no, we're not eating these bad foods. And so when that happens, you're going to want the people around you, when they see your response, that's the whole purpose of being a Christian, is to show Christ and have someone go, what do they have? What is that? I want it too. And they talk and talk to you like, wow, you dealt with that really well. And so that's kind of the whole object, is making sure that we're glorifying God with our lives. And one of the ways we can do that is by discovering what our personality type is and then recognizing the sinful brokenness of it and trying to fix it so that you can live your best life for Christ and for your spouse as well.
Yeah, and that's not, I love how you worded that, because it's not so that you can hear people say, oh, you have a great marriage, or your husband's so wonderful, or you're so wonderful. That's not, it's to glorify God. All of this. And I have found that, and maybe this is, I'm going to say this statement, but correct me if I'm wrong. The couples that are just, oh, I'm so perfect all the time, and I've never had a fight or an argument. I can't relate to those type of couples. The ones that try to conceal or hide the mess of a marriage, because marriages could be messy. Now, I'm not saying glorify the mess, but the ones who try to mask it behind closed doors. I can't relate to those type of people. It's the marriages that I feel like have had those, both highs and lows, are the ones that have
Stronger.
Stronger, are more gritty. I don't know, real. I have no idea. I don't know what word to use to that.
You have a really good point there. I like that point. The fact of the matter is, if you're one of those people that's saying, I've never had a fight with my spouse in my entire life, there's probably something going on beneath the surface in one of you that's just not good. You've got to get those feelings
Or you
out.
might both be stuffers.
You might both be stuffers. That's right. And so one of you might be sitting off to the side like this is the worst marriage ever, and the other one's like, well, I live in the best marriage ever. And so like you guys might not even be on the same page. So you want to make sure that if you've never had an argument with your spouse, make sure you don't have something that you need to talk about, because there's probably something going on there.
So let's talk about how to argue. And this is, and I'm going to say this is an area that Brett and I failed miserably at the beginning of our marriage. Like, and we still fail. Let me not just say, like, we still fail at this. Marriage is always a work, always, you're learning about your spouse. So even after 14 years, and I hope that when we get to 50 years, we're still learning about each other. But how to argue. When I was going through my divorce, I was blessed by going to an incredible counselor. A counselor that gave me skills and tips to not only help me get through my divorce, but also for the rest of my life.
See, I lucked out on that because she got the short end of the stick, because she came in with all of these skills and abilities to recognize these things, and me, I came in nothing.
No, well,
I didn't go to counseling after my divorce, and I didn't do any of those things. And so when I came into the marriage, I learned a little bit, but I definitely didn't have the same knowledge set that she did, and she brought into the marriage, which was a wonderful blessing.
God knew that. God knew it all.
That's right. So he put someone that knows a lot with someone that knew nothing, and so we're good.
No. No, but I was thankful that I did have this baseline, because, like I said at the beginning, well, I'm going to even say this. Even though I had that baseline knowledge, still at the beginning I did a horrible job. And part of that was I just expected Brett to know the stuff that I knew. It was like, don't you know this? Like, in my mind, I'm thinking, like, don't you know how to argue?
It's common sense. And I'm sitting here like, what in the world are you talking about?
It isn't. So anyway, this is what I learned. The foundation, the base, the foundation when you are arguing, and obviously you will expand upon this. You don't have to do this every time, but it's going to be like this. When you do blank, it makes me feel blank. The other person then will respond, what I hear you saying is, when I do blank, it makes you feel blank. If they don't hear what you're saying, you say it again or say it in a different way. You stay there until there's that understanding. It seems so simple, but when you are upset with each other, or if you don't have that foundation of communication, it's not as easy as you think. No. So let's do an example.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Let's do an example. So for instance, how about I spend too much? Hey, honey, look, I just bought a PlayStation 8.
Okay, and so for me as a wife, we're really trying to save money. Money is tight, and here he buys this PS2. This is a hypothetical situation, but this is a very real, this could happen.
Yeah.
Even as he's giving this hypothetical situation, like if this were to happen, I would be really frustrated. And I would be hurt, because I know how tight our budget is. Okay, this is something we've talked about. A lot of feelings.
Yeah.
So I would have to do this. One, I would need to stop, think, pray, calm myself first. Another thing we do is during arguments is hold a hand. It can be really hard. Sometimes it looks like this.
Yeah, sometimes it's not easy, but
so try to physically touch one another
be in contact with
if
the
you
person.
can. Now, if I know I'm going on a little bit rabbit trail, but if one of you is overstimulated, especially moms, if they're touched by little ones all day long and be really overstimulated, touch might not be good. So it might just be, hey, I really want to hold your hand right now, but I know that you're overstimulated, so I'm just going to sit here like this, but know that I do want to hold your hand. So even just a communication of holding hand and acknowledging that you want to connect.
I'm COVID holding your hand. Where you're like,
Anyway, so now let's go to that scenario of how it should be. And I'm going to approach him when I feel calm. I can still feel frustrated. I can still feel hurt. But I need to come to him with love and respect and honor, like the Bible tells us to. Brett, when you bought that PS2, it hurt my feelings, and it made me feel like you're not providing for our family, like you're not honoring what we have talked about financially, and it makes me feel unprotected, because like you're not gonna take care of me, and you care more about a silly PS2 than me.
what I hear you saying is that when I bought this thing, it made you feel unloved and uncared for, and it's probably something I should not have purchased.
Yes. And so from there, now you have to come up. Now the point is problem solving.
Yeah.
So, and that's where you have to work it out. It could, the problem solve might be returning it. It might be a compromise. It could be like, hey, would it be okay if I picked up a couple hours so that I could pay for this thing? You know, whatever it is. Like that's where the
you
main
two as a team.
Yeah.
As a team, and that's something I'd like to bring up. Is that one of the key things you want to remember whenever you're having any kind of discussion is that you're a team. It's not a coach student. It's not a this is my enemy. You guys are a team that God has put together, and so as long as you keep that focus, it will help with the discussions. You have to take a breath, take a step back, go to your separate corners for a minute or so, and come together and say, okay, as a team, how do we fix this issue that we have?
This is what it could look like. You bought what? What did you buy?
It's a PlayStation 8. It's on sale.
Oh my goodness, I can't believe you bought that. You know how our money is so tight. I can't believe you did that. I can't believe you don't love me. You don't care about our family. I can't believe this. Why would you do that? That's how not to handle it. Did you actually see Brett right away? He was like,
because I'm a stuffer.
He's a stuffer.
And so what's going to happen is I'm going to take all those feelings that I just had, and I'm going to go, I make money. I earn the money in this household. How dare... That's probably what's real going on in my brain. Like, I just bought you this thing the other day. You didn't have a problem with it. And so those thoughts, as they go through your brain as a stuffer, you've got to filter them, of course. Don't just vomit them out. But
the passive person really needs to make sure that they're not being passive aggressive, which basically means underhanded comments, really not getting to the point, but just kind of like touching the point, but kind of being snarky with that. But the aggressive person has to make sure that they're not going too far into the point, that they drill it too hard and more in aggressive ways. So a really important thing to have when you're not in an argument is setting up boundaries for an argument.
Yes.
What that looks like is setting guidelines for when you argue.
Right, and those guidelines are important, and it's especially important for stuffers. I mean, but it's important on both sides, because everyone has scars and wounds inside them. And I say scars, but I don't think scars is a good term, because a scar is healed. You don't feel scars anymore. So this is more, you have open wounds from your past. Maybe a previous marriage, it may be your upbringing, your childhood. But what would happen is, if someone pokes that wound, you're going to react no matter, and it's going to be in a way that you don't want. So setting up those boundaries is important to let each other know what those wounds are and what those sensitive areas are. And
you might find in your marriage that you need different boundaries. Great boundaries to have are no name calling, no cursing. Let's say we passed a boundary. How you handle that is not, you just did this, or I'm not talking to you anymore because you did this. Not at all. It's first a reminder of, hey, you passed this boundary.
Yep. You just crossed that boundary, and then the person that crossed the boundary needs to acknowledge you're right, and then back down a little bit. Because if you're boundaries and you're that heated that you're willing to cross them, knowing that you're gonna hurt the other person emotionally in what could be a horrible way. Once that's brought up, you've got to just you've got to take a step back and cool yourself down a little bit.
Honestly, the success in arguing, it takes humbling yourself. In order to have a good argument, both parties have to be willing to humble themselves when they start to do something wrong. You're probably going to do something wrong. We all have. We have made plenty of mistakes.
Yeah.
And that's where, in a marriage, you learn mercy, grace, humility. I mean, I know I have hurt Brett deeply, and he has hurt me deeply with words or actions and things like that over the years. But that wouldn't give me an excuse to do it back.
Right.
Or up in one bit of like, well, he did this, so I can do this. No, not at all.
She did that, so I want her to never do it again, so I'm going to do this, which is much, much worse.
Yeah.
You don't want to do that.
Yeah, so ultimately it really does take humbling yourself. And last thing on this, and then we'll move on to the next topic, is knowing that you can't change the other person. You can't change them. But when you're in a marriage, a healthy marriage, you get to a point where you don't want to be doing something that is hurting your spouse. You don't want to be doing something that bothers your spouse. If they know that you're doing something, then it would be, hey, could you please stop? And there's that acknowledgement of that.
So I think one of the final thoughts is that you can't change the personality type of your spouse. There are things about your spouse you can change. Do they spend too much money? Do they play too many video games? Do they do drugs? Are they drinking? I mean, there are so many different things that we can change and we can help our spouses to overcome. But what you're not going to be able to change is I'm never going to be able to make Stephanie be a stuffer like me, and she's not going to be able to make me become more aggressive like she is. We can adjust a little bit ourselves, but ultimately what we are called to do as followers of Christ is to appreciate the differences in the other person and capitalize on those differences to help ourselves become more like Christ.
Yes.
Because Christ had the perfect balance between passive aggressiveness and aggressiveness. He was perfect. And so that's what we are called to do as Christians and with our spouses as well.
Yeah, that's right. Nailed it. You worded that perfectly. Really appreciating the spouse. Now, one thing I do want to touch on something that you said. It doesn't mean that you yourself can use that as an excuse, kind of like, well, this is who I am, so deal with it. Yeah, no. If you're ever having to go that route of like, this is who I am, deal with it, you're not glorifying God. You're not glorifying God. All of your actions, despite your personality, need to glorify God. All of how you feel about a certain topic. It's okay to feel angry, upset, hurt, betrayed. I don't know. What are some other feelings? It's okay to have those feelings, but it's not okay to act out of that. You still have to be honoring to your spouse in that.
So to wrap up, first thing, make sure that your discussion or your argument or your heated discussion, whatever you want to call it, make sure that it is glorifying to God, and that's your ultimate goal. How is this going to change my marriage for God's glory? Not for my own pleasure, my own comfort, but for God's glory.
And if you are struggling just with the basic communication aspect, just as we did, okay? There's no we don't need to do the basics. Oh, yep, sometimes you might be. There are times that even to this day, we're like, what I hear you say. We have to go back to the foundation, okay? So there's no shame in needing to go back to that foundation. But remember, the foundation is, when you do this, it makes me feel this, and then the other person is going to say, what I hear you saying is blank. So that's it. That is how to argue. Every marriage is going to have arguments, but how we argue does matter. Every argument should be bringing glory to God and bringing you closer together.
That's right.
And giving you an understanding about the other person.
And I like how you worded that. You should argue to understand, not to win. Because if you're arguing to win, then your
already
spouse,
lost.
You've already lost.
You already lost.
Your spouse is now your combatant. It's no longer your spouse. So.
Yeah, you're a team. If you are in a sticky spot in your marriage and you are struggling right now, I'm glad that you are watching this video. That is great. But you're probably going to need to do a little bit more than just watch this video. I would seek wisdom if you're in a church. Hopefully you're in a church. Talk to people at your church. If you need Christian counseling, we have sought counseling in our marriage during certain seasons. Yeah. Sure, YouTube can be a great resource. It can be. But you want to make sure that what you're hearing is rooted into the Word, not just generic fluff from the world, because there's a lot of bad advice out there as well. We hope that this encourages you in your marriage, because as hard as marriage can be, it's also wonderful. It really is,
it is a
wonderful, a great reward to be doing life with your best friend. It is worth the fight. It's worth it. So anyway, we will talk to you all later, and we hope you have a great rest of your day.
Right.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.